Okay, I think we're live. Hopefully we are. I haven't done one of these on a Google Hangout in quite a while. So I'm going to want to make sure real quick that that I go to my channel and make sure that we are live. Welcome everybody. Hopefully you are seeing this and we are in fact live. Yep, there it is. Let me get here and yep, there it is. Yes. Okay, so we are live. Welcome everyone. Super excited to be here with you today because I've got a whole lot of stuff to talk about, and we've got a super special guest hanging out with us tonight that I am thrilled to introduce. I'm not going to introduce him to you because you know who he is, but to bring to my channel for the first time. I'm super excited about that. But while we wait for people to come in, I don't want to jump the gun here too quickly. I want to talk to you about something that, I mean, I describe everything this way. Everything is super exciting to me, right? Well, I want to talk about something that is super exciting to me, and I hope it will be to you. First of all, this isn't it. It's not it. No. But yes, you can finally see Lisa's tank. You know why you can see it? Because she didn't tell me to turn the lights off. So it's on, and she's not in here to be here with me tonight. So there you go. Now, the reason why she's not here with me tonight is because she doesn't like me calling her she. What's that mean? I don't know if anybody has watched or seen the comments of 2 weeks ago's live stream, but I called her she while she was sitting right next to me, and quite a few people got really angry with me for calling her she. I'm not sure what I was supposed to call her, but you know, I guess you're not supposed to call a girl that's sitting right next to you she, a woman, excuse me. Whoa, not going to call her a girl. No, let's talk about what I am really excited to talk to you about. Lisa does not want me to announce this because I've gotten myself into trouble before, but I'm not going to get myself in trouble today because this is happening. It's already in the works, and I'm really excited, if you can't tell. No, it's not the garage. No, it is not a fish tank project. It's not a new endorsement or sponsor or anything like that. No, this is actually much more simple than that. I was thinking about 3 weeks ago, I don't know, I was on my way to work and I was thinking, you know, Lisa and we did a video together like 5 years ago, her and I sitting next to each other. And we did a video, and it was an episode of KG Q&A, and it was a lot of fun. Wasn't the greatest video because I didn't have good equipment then, and we were in the shop, and the audio was terrible, blah, blah. Who cares? It was a lot of fun, and I was thinking about Lisa and I need to do a video together. We haven't done a video in 5 years together. We've done streams. She's done her videos. I've done mine, but we haven't done any videos together. And so I started to process in my mind, what could we do together? What kind of a video could we do? And I start thinking of all of these different topics that we could talk about. And I started saying, you know what? We need to come up with a topic, and then I need to come up with 10 things about that topic that her and I could talk about. And we could go back and forth, and it'd be a lot of fun. And then the idea hit me. Well, that's the video right there. 10 things. And then all of a sudden the floodgates opened up, and it became something much bigger than I had originally thought in the very beginning. I am going to start a video series, not just one video, but a whole series of videos. And the title of the video series is going to be 10 Things. This is going to be my 10 Things series. And what it is, you know that top 10 lists are very popular on YouTube. I'm not just talking about your average top 10 list. I'm not going to do my top 10 cichlids, my top 10 favorite YouTube channels, my top 10 favorite this. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about 10 things you should know about blank. And that when I was thinking about this, and I started thinking of the opportunities that we would have, the possibilities that we would have, it just, my mind was blown. I sat down for 15 minutes and I focused on topics, and I came up with 56 topics off the top of my head that we could do 10 things you should know about videos. And so I have barely slept. I have been so excited because this is going to be something, again, that her and I do together, where we're both delivering these 10 things that you need to know about a topic. The opportunities are endless. It's almost like I'm going to be able to start over as a YouTube channel because I can do all of the topics that I talked about way back in the day. I can do new ones. I can explore other things. We can have so much fun. When I say explore other things, I'm not talking about things outside of fish keeping. I'm saying other things that I haven't talked about yet. You see how much my hands, I look like JH Aquatics. You see how much I'm going crazy with my hands here? That's because I'm so excited about this, and I can't wait to get started. Yes, I did, Paul. I did write down the 56 topics. Yes. In fact, I wrote them down as I was thinking about them. And when I was done, when I was like, okay, that seems like enough, I looked at it and it was 56. And I was like, wow, here we go. So I'm super excited about it. The first episode of my 10 Things series, and should I say our 10 Things series, is going to come out December 16th. That is a Sunday. That is going to be, from that point on, my regular Sunday upload every single week. That's not all we're going to do. We're going to continue doing these live streams. I'm going to continue producing a video per week, telling you what I got going on here. And Lisa's going to do a video every week. At least she's going to try. She's got a busy schedule. We'll have to see. Maybe every 2 weeks for her or something. I don't know. We'll see. But I'm going to get her to do as many as possible. So we're talking, if this goes the way I want it to go, we're talking about the possibility of 4 pieces of content every week from us. Do you think I'm dedicated to this? Oh, yes, I am. So definitely excited. I hope you are too. December 16th. Real quick, I want to talk about this because I know y'all came to see the other bald guy, not me. So before I bring him in, there's something really cool about the series that I want to do. This is not going to be me and Lisa sitting in front of an aquarium reading a list of 10 things back and forth to each other. No, it's going to be much different than that. This is going to be something like I've never done before. It's not going to look like any video you've ever seen me do before. And one of the exciting things about it is that I'm going to be able to give you, if you want, you don't have to, I can do it without you, but I want to give you the opportunity to send in your video footage of the topics that we are doing. And I might use that footage as B-roll footage, which will be credited to you, of course, in those videos. Example, the very first one that we're going to do, 10 things that you should know about Discus. That's, I figured, come in with a bang, right? Do one of the heavy hitters in the fish keeping hobby. If you have video footage of the most amazing Discus you've ever seen, send it to me. Send it to me through Facebook. I will explain at the end of the video because I don't want to keep going on and on. If you stay tuned to the end of this stream, I'll talk about it a little bit more, maybe get Jason's input on it, what he thinks of the idea. It would just be nice to hear about it from another YouTuber. But I'll give you the opportunity to send in your footage, which I would show, and I would put your name as credit and everything on there. It'd be a lot of fun. So you don't have to do that. I've got my own stuff, but it'd be a great way for other people to be able to get involved in something like this. Last thing I want to say is I don't know how many people are going to be on here watching this tonight because something got screwed up. I'm assuming it's my fault because I'm the only one that does anything that has to do with setting up the stream and all that. I don't know why it was telling y'all that this stream wasn't till tomorrow night. I don't know what happened there. I could have swore I set it up for today at 8 o'clock. So a lot of people might be thinking that I'm not here tonight. And yeah, there you go. I don't know. They're going to be really upset. But, they can watch it on replay tomorrow if they're excited to come and see my guest that I have with me tonight. I said I was not going to do this. I said I was not going to bring in guests to my live stream. And it was no personal reason for that. It was just, it's very complicated and people's schedules and all of this. It's difficult. But I met this guy at the Aquatic Experience, and one big glaring reason, I think you'll see in a minute, something that him and I very much have in common. And I don't mean the gray in the beard. I clicked with a guy at the Aquatic Experience. We had so many conversations. We had a lot of fun. We're the same age. We got to know each other. Our old ladies got to know each other. We had a good old time. And he was somebody that I instantly walked away from saying, that guy's my friend. Not somebody that I just know because I've chatted with and commented on his videos, but this is a guy that I would consider to be a friend. And that's what got the idea in my head. You know what? If I'm going to have a guest, I'm going to bring that guy on because that would be a lot of fun. Reached out to him a few weeks ago. He said, yes, let's do it. So now here we are. So Jason, if you could go ahead and unmute your microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, we are joined today by Jason from Primetime Aquatics. Jason, here you are finally, my bald brother on YouTube.
How's everybody doing tonight? Here I am. Yeah, John, it was a great time getting to know you at the Aquatic Experience, and Lisa. Yeah, it was a lot of fun. We had a lot in common, you know, going back with the cichlids, and I think we think a lot alike when it comes to our fish rooms, and it's been a great time. It's been really nice getting to know you, and I'm definitely was excited when you said, hey, come on the live stream. I thought that would be really cool. So yeah, here we are.
Well, and you know, the idea really hit me when it occurred to me that you're kind of a rule breaker when it comes to the aquarium hobby. And I like to think of myself as that way too. You maybe don't advertise being a rule breaker the way I do, but you've definitely got some tanks in your fish room that are definitely not by the book. And so when I thought about that, and I was like, hey, that sounds like a topic that we could have a whole lot of fun with. I got to get Jason on. And it took us a little bit, but we finally made it happen. So I'm super excited for you to be here to talk about breaking these rules. Uh-oh, are you muted, or are you just
here I am. Yeah.
Oh, you didn't realize I was handing it over to
you. Yeah, no, I am here. Yeah, you know, one of the things I know you had mentioned is sometimes we do things that the internet says, well, you probably shouldn't do that. And it's not that I go out and purposely try to break the rules. It's just things happen in a fish room, and you start mixing and matching certain fish or doing certain things, and you find out it works. And then you only find out later, wow, people said you're not supposed to do that, but I've never had any issues, you know, maybe keeping South American and African cichlids together. And we could talk more about that later, or doing some of the other things that I do. So I don't necessarily intentionally go out and try to break the rules. It's just something that happens as you keep fish and you start to learn fish behavior and their diets and their temperament, and even specific fish, because you can have, let's say, an Oscar, and people say, oh my gosh, my Oscar it wreaked havoc on my tank, and it was the most evil, horrible, aggressive fish. And then you'll have other people say, wow, my Oscar was really, really laid back. And you have to not only know the species of fish that you're keeping, but you should also know the personality of that specific fish. And that can certainly help in making decisions on how you're going to keep certain things.
Absolutely. And, you know, folks, you might be listening to Jason, maybe you've been living under a rock and you have not seen his channel. Shame on me. You're listening to this guy and you're thinking, man, that guy is smart. Well, there's a very specific reason for that. And shame on me, I forgot to ask him to introduce himself. I live in this YouTube bubble where I just feel like everybody knows everybody, but there's probably people that are here right now that have not seen you, Jason. They don't know who you are. They don't know that there's another bald guy on YouTube. So take a minute before we get hot and heavy into this topic here, because we've got a list of things that we're going to talk about as far as breaking the rules. But take a minute to, or take as many minutes as you want to introduce yourself, let people know who you are and why it is that you sound so smart.
Well, I don't know if I sound smart or not. It might be the microphone, or it might be the cool headphones that I'm borrowing from one of my sons. I feel like a DJ. It's pretty awesome. So yeah, I'm Jason Adams. Primetime Aquatics is my YouTube channel. I've been keeping fish since I was 6 years old. I tell this story all the time of getting this goldfish when I was about 6, putting it in a fishbowl, and things really took off from there. Had multiple tanks as a child growing up. My parents allowed us to have lots of pets, which was pretty cool. So I've been keeping fish all my life. So about, I don't know, close to 40 years or so. In addition to that, I have a science background. So I majored in biology and minored in chemistry. I went on to do a master's degree in biotechnology and chemical science. And from there, I started teaching at the college level. And so I am an associate professor of biology and microbiology. I've taught courses in parasitology and virology, biology of mammals, general zoology. I've taught a lot of the ologies related to the life sciences. I've since gone on and done master's certificates in online teaching. I've done another one in aquaculture and fish health. And so I try on my channel to tie in all of that with real world examples of, the hobbyist side of things and keeping fish. And so we talk about things like water hardness and pH and breeding fish and caring for them. And yes, once in a while I do some things that maybe the internet says we're not supposed to do, but it generally works out okay.
Well, let me ask you, biology professor, because there's a specific analogy that I like to use, and I'd like to get your input on the whether this is a worthy analogy or not. Because whenever I talk about like an ammonia spike, or I talk about the cycling process, and I talk about the buildup of ammonia in an aquarium, I like to say that it's like human beings being in an airtight room that all of a sudden starts to fill up with smoke, and you find it hard to breathe, your lungs start burning. That's the analogy that I like to use to make it clear to people who might not know about what an ammonia spike is. Does that make sense? I mean, scientifically, does that make sense? Am I using a good analogy there? Because I've been doing it for about 20 years. So,
that's a great analogy. And it's funny you mentioned that. Didn't realize you had done it before, but I used that exact same analogy, not necessarily talking about ammonia, but I did a video on nitrate, and I used that exact same analogy where, low levels of nitrate is just kind of like having a smoke-filled room. It's not super dangerous, but you don't feel at your best. And then as the nitrate levels increase, so does the smoke, and pretty soon you've got some serious health issues. But you could certainly apply that same thing to ammonia or nitrites. I think it's a pretty good analogy. You did a good job.
Well, thank you, Professor. I'm glad to hear that. It's good to get validation. I mean, I've been telling people that for years, since way before I had a YouTube channel. That's always been the way I've described it. So that's cool. I'm glad to hear that from a professor like yourself. So okay. I'm going to keep my eye off of the chat, because here's what we're going to do, folks. Jason and I are going to chat a little bit about this topic that we're talking about. Now that you know him, now that you know that the guy is a daggone professor, come on. I mean, you can't question his education when it comes to this stuff. So you better pay attention. I wish I had my little video of Brad Williams saying, "Pay attention." I put that in my videos. I would definitely put that here right now. Because what this guy talks, you need to listen. But what I still want to say, even though Jason is as educated as he is, I am not. I'm just high school educated, and my education on fish keeping is based on decades of doing it and my personal experiences and what I've been taught by what we used to call old timers in the hobby back in the day, when we had to actually learn from people and not from computers. So everything that we talk about, and I'll let Jason, give his 2 cents on this. Everything that we're going to talk about here, we are not rewriting any rules. We're not saying that you should do things a certain way. We are giving you our experiences and our opinions about every single thing that we talk about from this point forward. We are by no means, well, Jason's an expert because, but I am not putting myself out there as any kind of an expert. I'm just giving you my experiences. So please understand that there are things that we could talk about here tonight and say that they worked for us. They might not work for you. So understand that there is no blanket set of rules when it comes to this stuff. So, but there are rules that people kind of live by, and that's what we're going to be talking about here today. Things that are unwritten rules, like things that everybody knows to be taboo things in this hobby. That's what we're going to talk about. So, Jason, I don't know if you want to give that public service announcement too before we start, or what?
Absolutely. And that's something that, I had been thinking about the last couple of days. Is we're going to talk about things that we do that work for us. But again, like you said, just because something works for us doesn't mean it's going to necessarily work for you. And I think it's really important to understand what's going on in your specific ecosystem before you make changes, or before you start to look at those rules and say, "Oh, I wonder if I can push this a little bit." And one of the things that I was thinking about as we were looking at this topic is we have to define what a rule is in fish keeping, and something that you really should be following, as opposed to a personal preference. And sometimes for people, those personal preferences can almost turn into a rule that is a non-negotiable. And that's where things get a little muddy, especially for newer fish keepers. I think a lot of the rules are really good ideas for people who don't have a lot of experience keeping fish. It will prevent them from making mistakes. But as people get more comfortable with the hobby, as they gain more experience, sometimes the things that are said don't necessarily play out in real life.
Well, and you know, some of these rules too, because I completely agree with what you're saying, but some of these rules are broken by new fish keepers. They don't realize they're breaking those rules. And so when they hear that that's a rule, they're like, what? I've been doing that for 5 years. You know, what are you talking about? I didn't know you couldn't have Oscars with that fish. So, I mean, it is true. I think that fish keeping rookies can, you know, get taught bad information by YouTubers that are in King George, Virginia, sitting in their office, and they hear something and they believe that to be fact, and they go with that, and they end up doing something that is against the rule book, and they don't even realize that they're doing it. And so the new fish keepers are some of the biggest rule breakers ever. They kind of set the standards for rule breaking. I know I broke the first rule that I broke, and I guess I'll just go right into this. Because this just popped into my head. I told you before we started this that I was my head was blank here. We were going to have to go off your list, but I did think of one. The very first aquarium that I bought as an adult, I had tanks as a kid, but I didn't care about them because I was a kid and I just wanted to go outside. But the first tank I bought as an adult, I bought for a silver arowana. The arowanas are what got me into this hobby. That's the first fish I fell in love with, and it's the first fish I had to have. I put that fish in a 29-gallon tank. I was told by the guy, he was probably a year older than me, that was working at the pet store that I bought it from, oh, they just grow to the size of the tank. So it'll be fine. You know, this fish can get, 3 to 4 feet in the wild, but it's not in the wild. He's in your tank at home, so it'll be fine. I didn't realize I broke one of the most cardinal rules in fish keeping by putting that fish in a 29. But this is a good example of a bad break of the rules. You know, this is the kind of thing I would never encourage somebody to put a fish like that in a 29-gallon tank. I mean, that's just absolutely absurd. But it's a good example of somebody that's new to fish keeping. I didn't have 70,000 videos available to me to watch on YouTube, just like you didn't when you started. So I didn't know. I was going by what I was told, and I was told wrong. I think a lot of people, they do those things wrong and they just stick with it because that's just what they know. And that can get them into trouble when they meet other fish keepers. But that was probably my first breaking of the rules. It was not done intentionally to break the rules. I was not trying to be some kind of renegade out there. I was stupid and I was young, and I broke a rule that should absolutely not be broken. So please don't take that as a acceptable breakage of the rules, because that's not what it was at all. But yeah, I started off my fish keeping hobby breaking the cardinal rule of fish keeping. So there you go. And people are actually listening to what I have to say. It's weird.
Yeah, and I've done the same thing. In fact, I got you beat. I once put an arowana when I was young in a 35-gallon hex. So yeah, that was a good one. I look back, I bought a 35-gallon hex when I was probably a very young teenager. And I remember that tank. I remember having a Jack Dempsey, a convict, a purple spot goby, and I want to say at one point I might have put a discus in there. I just didn't know. We didn't have the internet. So, you listen to people at the fish store, and if they tell you, oh yeah, it's fine, or they don't ask any questions and it's just something you want, you just kind of did it. That was something not in a million years would I ever try to do again. The tank was obviously way too small. The footprint was too small. The discus didn't do well in that setup, but you learn as you go. But with the internet now and with people offering advice and some really good channels out there, you can save yourself a lot of pain by not making the big mistakes.
Well, and I like to think, as I have dogs barging into the office here now, I like to think that everybody is like me. And when they decide they're going to get into something, they go on YouTube and obsess over it for weeks and weeks before they actually do it. I like to think that everybody is that way. I mean, for me, it doesn't matter if I'm going to buy a Chihuahua or if I'm going to get anything. It doesn't matter. I'm always right there on YouTube. It's like you can learn everything you need to know. So hopefully if somebody is getting into fish keeping and they're wondering about these rules, these unwritten rules, hopefully they watch this and get information from the professor before they make their decisions on what they're going to do. I want to say something real quick. Folks, we are going to get to the chat once we get through this topic. Give us a little bit of time. We'll go through the chat. So understand I'm not ignoring anybody. I've got a guest on here with me today. I don't want to just read through the chat the whole time. Me and Ike are going to sit here and look through it while Jason's talking. But we'll get to your questions. If you have questions for Jason, don't waste your time and ask me questions. We've got a guest on here tonight. So find questions for him and put them in the chat. I will scroll through it and I'll pick out the good ones as we go here. So do you want to refer to your list, Jason, or do you want me to read them? I mean, I guess I will. Why not? I'm already talking here. So the first one that you said, which again is the reason why I came up with this idea to do this topic, was mixing African cichlids with New World cichlids. Your tank, well, I'm going to let you say what's in your tank, but I definitely noticed that right off the bat with you.
Yeah, and that, to be clear, that is not something I started out and I intended to do. I've got a 125-gallon tank. When I set this tank up, I did something that would seem pretty reasonable, at least. I had 3 medium-sized Oscars, and I had a jewel cichlid that had grown up with them. And my thought was, all right, I'm going to build this 125. I'm going to go ahead and put these 3 Oscars in there. And if they get larger, they'll move to an even larger tank. And that was what I intended to do. And then things change, as they often do in the fish keeping hobby when you're keeping fish or multiple tanks. All of a sudden, I had gone to an auction and there was somebody selling, there was a bag for auction. It was Nile tilapia, so Oreochromis niloticus. Now, these fish get big, and it got to the point where they're just basically begging somebody, please take these fish. And so I bid $1 and I got these fish. I'm like, all right, well, they're tiny. They're like an inch. I'll throw them in a 10-gallon. I'll let them grow up. I'm going to a swap a couple weeks later or a month later. I'll go ahead and move those fish there. At least I could buy the fish and they're not taking them home. Well, I kept one, and the other ones I sold, and I put that in the 125. So now we've got a fish from a different continent. And this is a big fish. This Nile tilapia is about, now I think it's close to 16 or 17 inches, needs a larger tank. We're going to be dealing with that. But now I've got an Oscar from South America with Nile tilapia. This thing is huge. Why did I think it would work? Because the Nile tilapia really is an aggressive fish. And in my personal experience, the Oscars that I've kept don't tend to be super aggressive. Yes, they have large mouths, and because of that, they will eat fish that are somewhat larger. And I think because of that, maybe they get a bad rap. But my personal experience is a well-fed Oscar tends not to be super aggressive, although it will eat smaller fish. And because Oscars are so big, yeah, they eat a decent amount of fish sometimes. So I had that. And then I wound up with a 75-gallon peacock tank. I had some red empress, and a subdominant red empress male was getting beat on pretty bad. And, with 50 tanks, you're like, where do I put this fish so that it can heal? And my first thought was, I'm going to put it in the Oscar tank because I figured the Oscar and the tilapia would leave it alone. And sure enough, I put it in there and it was left alone and it healed and it was wonderful. So now I've got peacocks, I've got this Nile tilapia, I've got Oscars. And then I started with these OBs. And so the OBs that I have are a mix between red empress and dragon bloods. And I had these fish and I sold all the dragon blood looking mixes that I had. And I had these little silver fish and I didn't know what to do with them. So I'm like, you know what? I'm going to put them in the 125. Let's grow them up and see what happens. Now, at the time, these fish were maybe 1.5 inches, and the Oscar at that point was 10 inches. They left them alone. The tilapia, the Oscar left them alone. And I've found that you feed the fish well, they tend not to want to waste the energy to chase other fish. Now, is that going to happen in your instance? In your case, maybe not. So I'm not saying go out and throw a 1-inch fish in a full-size Oscar tank and it'll be fine. But for us, it worked. And so then we had these really beautiful OBs. And so now we've got these mixed Africans. We've got the Nile tilapia. We've got the Oscar. Later on, I threw a Geophagus steindachnerii in there because I had to separate the male from the female. They were having babies like every 30 days. And then just recently, and this is the one I'm a little concerned about. I had to break up a small group of red devils because I got a mating pair. And so I put a red devil in that tank. And that is the one out of everything I've done in that tank. That's the one thing where I'm going to have to keep a very close eye on that, because that has the potential to be a very aggressive fish. So we're watching it. It's on the smaller side. So I think it's going to work temporarily, but we'll remove it if it doesn't work.
Well, and that's the biggest thing, that if there's a new fish keeper that's listening to this, Jason can take those risks, because you've got 60 something tanks. If it doesn't work, he can take that fish and put it somewhere else. So you have to know that. I mean, if you're somebody setting up your first tank, you only have one, and it goes wrong, what are you going to do? You know, the fish stores won't always take stuff back. So wow, I just did that right on the microphone. Him having the options of moving things around is something that will definitely help him out to do that. And I don't really have that right now. Like, I can't take many risks like that right now, because I've just got the 2 tanks that are the bigger tanks. And if something goes wrong in there, I'm not going to take a peacock out and put it in with the discus, even though we're talking about breaking rules here. I'm not silly. I'm not going to do that. But you know, hey, it's possible that it could be done and it could work, but I'm just not willing to try that, because those are Lisa's fish, and that would be bad. Now, what about, just to piggyback on this a little bit, what do you say to people, because I know I've had this before, the people that are going to say, but Jason, you're putting a South American cichlid in with a tilapia, or wherever that fish is from, I'm not even sure, pardon me, and then with Africans, these are fish that all have different water parameter requirements. The cichlids from South America like soft water, and Africans like hard water. What do you say when you get that question?
That's actually a great question, and it's certainly a consideration. So, but one of the things that we have to think about is all of the fish that are in your fish room, or in various fish tanks, probably the water is the same in terms of pH, in terms of water hardness, unless you're using crushed coral or peat in a tank to get the pH down. But for the most part, most of the fish that we buy in the aquarium hobby, as long as the pH is stable, they're probably going to do okay. Now that doesn't, when we're talking about wild fish, that is a completely different story. But for instance, is an Oscar going to do okay at slightly above a neutral pH? Yes. Was it doing fine in the water that it was already in at a TDS of close to 200? It's growing like crazy. It's having a great life, as were all the other fish. So water parameters in this case were all the same, because they're all the same in all my tanks. The one thing I will say is diet. And I think that's something that you have to consider when you start looking at fish going into a tank that might be from different areas. Make sure you're looking at diet requirements. So for instance, I probably wouldn't take an Oscar and put that in an Mbuna tank for a lot of reasons. Reason number one is, in my experience, the Mbuna tend to be a little bit more aggressive than some of the peacocks. Not always, but sometimes. And the second thing is diet, and the Mbunas tend to like a more vegetable-based diet. The Oscars will do that too. The Oscars eat just about anything, but at the same time, Oscars, they like their occasional bloodworms. And so what I can do is I can feed him small blocks of bloodworms. He consumes them. The other cichlids really don't have the opportunity to eat it, but I wouldn't necessarily take that chance with Mbunas. The other thing I probably wouldn't do, if I had, let's say, an established tank of Mbunas, I'm like, oh, I've got this 3-inch Oscar, let me go ahead and chuck it in there. That's probably going to be something I wouldn't personally do. So again, these things that we're talking about, you really have to know the fish. You have to know your setup. Diet requirements are a big thing. But when it comes to water parameters, if they're already in your city water or your well water and they're doing fine, then chances are it's not something you're going to have to worry about quite as much.
Yeah, I mean, that's probably one of the biggest debates out there. That's why I asked you, because everybody talks about it's instantly, oh, it's water parameters. The water parameters are so different. They're different for discus than they are. And yeah, sure, that's true in the wild. But like you said, I mean, I've been to fish farms and they don't have different water sources. They get all of the water for all of their tanks from the same place. So yeah, I mean, do you want to do right by your fish? Yeah, of course you do. But keeping the water clean and keeping it consistent and stable, that is going to do a whole lot better than trying to drastically shift things one way or the other. Unless, like you said, you're dealing with wild caught fish, which I'm not a wild caught fish guy. I don't have anything against anybody doing it, but I don't keep wild fish. So that's never really going to be a concern for me. But yeah. And also on the topic of breaking rules, I'll never forget a lady came into my shop and she showed me photographs on her phone of her Oscar. And she was proud of this fish like it was one of her grandchildren. And she said, for 5 years, this was an old lady, for 5 years, every single day, I cut up a Nathan's, can't be ballpark, a Nathan's hot dog. And I cut that hot dog up, the whole thing, and I feed that hot dog to that Oscar. That's his treat for the night. And she said he gobbles it up. And if she doesn't do that, he starts banging the top of the tank because he's mad that she hasn't given him his hot dog. So you want to talk about breaking rules. I don't know that it's bad to feed an Oscar a Nathan's hot dog, but so
yeah, that's not something not necessarily that I would do is feed hot dogs, just because I don't know what it does to water quality, but if it worked, I was just reading this comment by Jamie McDonald, and he said, hey, it's really important to have consistency in your water parameters. And that is absolutely true. Consistency is better than trying to reach optimal, but having fluctuations in pH or water hardness or temperature. Once they get used to a water parameter, a lot of the fish that we keep in the aquarium hobby that have been bred in the aquarium hobby are going to do best right around normal water parameters. So roughly neutral, water hardness is going to be average throughout. They can deal with different water hardness, but as long as it's consistent, that's going to reduce the stress on fish.
So everybody run out and buy a pack of Nathan's hot dogs. And you know what? I love Nathan's hot dogs, but I know what they do to me. And I don't know what that's happened with my fish. But hey, I've seen a couple of people in the chat are saying that they feed their fish hot dogs. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, but Nathan's hot dogs are long. And to give an Oscar an entire one every single day, I don't know. That seems like a little overkill. But hey, that lady did it for 5 years, and she said it worked perfectly. So I want to talk about the one, because we've already been going 40 minutes here, although the first 15 of that was me running my mouth. I want to go with the one that you surprised me with, the next rule being broken. And this one surprised me because it's not something that I've ever done. And it's cleaning sponge filters in tap water. That one is new to me. I've always been the guy that siphons out 5 gallons. I don't have any sponge filters right now, but when I did, I would siphon out that 5 gallons that's been conditioned and everything, and then I would squeeze out all of my sponge filters in there. But you do it on tap water. So explain yourself, sir.
All right. So, and this is one we have to be really careful with. So to be clear, when I do this, all of my tanks are well established. I'm not the first person to say this. I know Corey has said this before on his channel, but every surface in your fish tank is a filter. It all grows bacteria. It's the decorations, fake and real plants, all the substrate, the glass on the aquarium, anything in there that has got surface area. If it's well oxygenated, it's going to grow bacteria, Nitrosomonas, Nitrobacter. So when you have a well-established tank, you've got that surface area. And if it's got decent flow, those microbes are probably growing. In my tanks, what we did is I noticed, you take your sponge filters out, and yes, I used to do it in a bucket full of tank water because that's what everybody says. And you do that and you squeeze it out a couple times. What happens to the bucket? The thing is nasty. It's just filled with sponge filter gunk. So then in my mind, it doesn't make a lot of sense to take that sponge filter and just keep squeezing it in that dirty water. And so I tried an experiment. I went through, and I'm not the first person that's done this. I think Ted Judy on his channel, he explained this process. I believe, and I don't want to misquote him or misrepresent what he was saying, but I think I saw him do that on his channel as well. And take the sponge filter, and just briefly, I use tap water right out of the sink, squeeze it a few times. It basically cleans it right back in the tank. And the idea here is the chlorinated water going to kill some of your beneficial bacteria? Most likely. Is it going to kill it all if you're just squeezing it out for a couple minutes and then throwing it right back in the tank? In my experience, that has never happened. And I do test water parameters. So the first couple of times I did it, I wanted to see, okay, am I going to get an ammonia spike? The the next day or a couple days later or a week later. That never happened. I never got a nitrite spike. Everything seemed to be working fine. Obviously, again, I would not do that if I just set up a tank and then I started cleaning a sponge filter, a used sponge filter, a cycled sponge filter a few days later. I don't know if I would be as comfortable doing that, but I used to take tanks that had multiple sponge filters. So if they had, 2 or 3 sponge filters in a tank, I would do one week with tap water, then wait a week and do the next one in tap water, so that I never had them both being cleaned with tap water the same week. Well, it got to the point where I couldn't remember which ones I was doing. So I just started doing them all. And I've been doing that now for a few years, not once in any of the tanks. We've got 60. And I think out of those 60 tanks, I think roughly 55 or so are running sponge filters. Not once have I ever had an ammonia spike. Not once have I ever had a nitrite spike. I am not saying that if you do it, you're going to be fine 100% of the time, but it is something you have to test. And the idea here is that, yes, you're probably going to kill some of that beneficial bacteria, but you've got enough there to grow. And now you've given them space and they've got excessive nutrients, and they should repopulate that sponge filter really quick. So I haven't had any issues. But to me, the whole tank water thing, if you're doing it in a bucket, then you're going to constantly have to change that water, because as soon as it gets murky, you're going to want to get new tank water in there, so you're not just sucking in the same dirty water every time you squeeze that sponge.
Yeah, that makes total sense. And again, it's just something that I just never considered. I mean, creature of habit, I did it. I've always done it the same way. Now, what about, and I completely agree, anybody who knows anything about the aquarium cycle, you only need to know about beneficial bacteria for a day to know that it grows on everything in the aquarium. What if you're somebody that has 75 tanks and you're breeding, and you have the majority of your tanks, nothing in them but fish and the sponge filter, where yes, the beneficial bacteria is going to be on the glass, but that's really the only place for it to be other than the filter. So your filter is going to be the primary source of the beneficial bacteria. Would you still do it then?
That's a great question. The short answer is probably not. Not if and I don't run any bare tanks. And so that's a great question. Every tank that I have, with the exception of our fry bins, has some type of substrate, whether that's sand or gravel. Pretty much every tank has either got some type of plant, whether it's live or fake or decoration or a cave structure or wood. So if I were running just a series of, let's say, 10-gallon grow-out tanks with absolutely nothing in them, would I be as bold to do that? Maybe not. Maybe at that point I would use tank water to do that, probably because, one, they wouldn't get quite as dirty. But yeah, I think if you're lacking the surface area in the tank, then maybe you'd want to back off on that a little bit.
Yeah, in my shop, I had like 8 55s that I actually put 2 sponge filters in. And I didn't clean them out in tap water because I didn't have the balls that you do. But even with them, squeezing it out in the bucket, I would only do 1 at a time. And I would save the other one for the following water change, So, but that was just me being overly paranoid, I guess, and not realizing that you could do that. But these were bare tanks, nothing in them but the fish, and 2 sponge filters. So I would do 1 at a time, and everything would work out just fine. But again, I wasn't doing it in tap water, and that's new to me. And, I don't have any sponge filters. I don't know that I will, because I don't know that I'm going to have mass tanks again. But it's a good thing to remember that. So,
and the thing is too, once again, please don't just take my word for it. If you're thinking about doing this, test. Make sure if you do it, maybe the first time, you don't leave it in there a very long time with the tap water. You put it back in the tank immediately. Someone in the comments mentioned something about temperature of the tap water. Yes, I make an effort to make sure the tap water that's coming out of the faucet is roughly the same temperature as what's in the tank. So it's not ice cold. It's not super hot. The temperature would absolutely, if it was very, very hot, do a lot of damage to bacteria in a short period of time. So I do make an effort to make sure the tap water and the tank water are roughly matched. And again, test your water, because the last thing you want is to be like, yeah, I cleaned all my sponge filters in tap water and now I've got an ammonia spike. Thanks a lot. So maybe you try it on a tank and test for ammonia the day after, the next day, up to about a week or so. And if you're not having any issues, you should be in pretty decent shape.
Now, man, I lost it. I had another. Oh, I do remember now. kind of, again, piggybacking on that, I told you this conversation was going to develop organically. Your water change procedures, another rule that's out there that, again, I don't know, it's not a rule, but a lot of people say when you do your water changes, and I do this in these 2 tanks and in the nanos, I use a Python, and I will get the water very close in temperature to what is in these tanks. This one we're running at 84, and that one is like 81, 82. With as many tanks as you have, what is your procedure, and what do you do with as far as temperature goes when you're doing your water changes in all those tanks?
That's a great question. So what we do is we have a sink downstairs with both hot and cold water. So what we'll do is we'll do our water changes, and then the nice thing is we've got a 50-foot hose that runs from our sink, and it's got a valve right next to where we can hook on the hose on each tank. So I try the best I can. We heat our room, and so the room is roughly somewhere around 82 degrees, which makes most of the tanks upper 70s, around 78, 79. And so we'll do our best to match the tap water to the tank water. The nice thing is once that's done, we only have to do it once, and then we can control the water right at the, when we're filling up the tanks with the valve that's closest to the tank. So we only have to do it one time. Yes, we do try to match the water as best we can temperature wise. And then we just dump in the dechlorinator right when we start to add the water.
See, that's another good one. As far as rules go, I'm glad you mentioned that, because there are people that are militant about water conditioners, which, I mean, I'm militant about using water conditioners, but using a Python, I put the water conditioner in as I'm filling the tank up. There's so many people that, and I'm not saying these people are wrong. It's probably the ideal way to do it, in my opinion, would be to store the water somewhere and dechlorinate it, or just let the chlorine gas off or whatever. But I'm glad that you said that you do it the same way I do, because that makes me feel a little bit better, because that's how I have always done it. I don't remember the last time I did a water change filling with buckets. I mean, come on, I'm too old for that, and my back is too bad for that. So Python, best invention that's ever been made for fish keeping. So yeah, I mean, what are you going to do with that? You have to put the water conditioner in while you're filling up the tank. Okay, the next one, change of topic here. This one's an interesting one for me. Her name is Mags, by the way. Maggie is her name. Yes, Lisa won't admit this, but she's named after Maggie from The Walking Dead, because we have Carl. Anyway, we have a cat named Carl, and we have a dog named Maggie. Anyway, the next one, and this is another one that kind of threw me for a loop, and I'm interested to hear your stance on this, and that is that you do not stress about deep sand. I mean, everybody's scared of those gas pockets. Everybody's afraid of that. Oh, you got to have snails to get rid of the gas pockets and all that. Talk to me about not stressing over deep sand.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I heard a lot on the internet is, oh, make sure your sand is like a half an inch. We don't want hydrogen sulfide building up from anaerobic bacteria. And so when I started to do that, I did a lot of, okay, we'll do a half inch. And as I got further along in the hobby, I either just because I wasn't paying attention as much, or wasn't finding problems, the sand got a little bit deeper. So yes, does hydrogen sulfide accumulate in the sand? It does, because there are times when we do water changes and we also use Python hoses. We've got like 6 or 7 of them running at the same time. If the Python hose goes into the sand in some of the tanks, do we get bubbles? We sure do. Do we smell hydrogen sulfide? Absolutely. The thing is, with all the tanks that we have in our fish room and all the sand that we have in our fish room, I've never had an issue with hydrogen sulfide gas killing fish. Usually when you're doing the water changes, the gas just goes right into the Python hose. It doesn't go into the surrounding environment. At least that's what I found. But I've never had that issue. And I think that's one of those things where somebody probably had a problem, or some people had some issues, and that kind of spread around the internet. But at least for me personally, and I've never met anybody else who's had a situation where, oh my gosh, I had sand that was too deep and hydrogen sulfide built up and all of a sudden it released a big bubble and I had a bunch of dead fish. So it's not something I stress about. Again, I'm not saying go ahead and fill your tanks with 4 inches of sand, but it's also not something that I've personally seen as an issue. And if you look at nature, I mean, even in some of these bogs and lakes and stuff, there's a ton of hydrogen sulfide in those environments, in that substrate, and yet life still happens.
Right. Yeah. And I did a video. It's one of the most watched videos on my channel, by the way, about maintaining sand. And I did mention that, although I've never had that happen to me. I mean, I've had sand in aquariums for years. I've never had like a mass fish death in a sand tank and thought, oh, well, there it is, gas bubble, it's never happened to me. But you hear it for so long, and so many people talk about it for years and years and years. And I've been hearing that since 1993. That's one of those things that it just stays in your head. And I'm glad to hear that you don't worry about it all that much too. It's one of those things for me. It's kind of always in the back of my head, but I mean, I don't know. I have sand in here. It's not super thick, but well, should I say Lisa has sand in here. But yeah, I've never had anybody, and I don't know anybody that's ever had that happen, but that's not saying it hasn't happened. I'm going to skip one on your list because we've gone for a while, and I don't know how long I have you here tonight, because this one could be pretty lengthy. Maybe we'll get back to it in a minute, but this one I really like. And this is one of those things that I could talk on for a while, but you're my guest, so you're going to do all the talking. The fact that you like to use common stuff, easy to find stuff that you could probably get at Walmart and PetSmarts and Petcos and all of that, brands like Tetra and Marineland and all of this stuff, that fish keeping elitists kind of poo-poo those big brands after a while because they're too good for that. You can't feed Tetra brand foods and Hikari, Hikari's for amateurs and all of this. I love that. One of my favorite videos on your channel is the one that you did recently about fish food, because I loved it. Yes, you have the Repashis, and I think you had some Northfin in there. You have the big brands, but then you have the Tetras and the Hikaris and stuff like that. And I was just like, thank God that somebody's not afraid to get made fun of for saying that they use those brands. I don't know how much of a breakage of rules this is, but if you look at it from the standpoint of the experienced fish keeper that is, smart and believes, that you have to use certain types of foods, the fact that you're using the cheaper brands, I admire that, and I like that.
Yeah, and again, it's not something that I actively push, like, oh, I'm trying to break the rules or save as much money as I can. It's just I've always used it. So the Tetra brand flakes, yeah, they're not flashy. And you look at the ingredients list, you're like, well, the ingredients here aren't the same as the ingredients in some of the more expensive foods. But I look at a couple things, and it's things I go into much more detail in that video that you referenced. Is one, are the fish eating it? Right. And again, I'm not the first person who's ever said that, but yeah, if the fish aren't going to eat it, if you can buy $100 per pound fish food, and if the fish aren't eating it, what difference does it make? You've wasted your money. And not only that, now you've got rotten food at the bottom of your tank. You've got extra tank maintenance. Oh, and by the way, your fish are hungry. So if the fish will eat it, that's one of the most important things. And not all fish will eat the same food. So I might feed some sinking New Life Spectrum pellets, but I can't feed that particular food to every one of my tanks because there are certain fish that just won't eat it, while there are other fish who love it. And it doesn't matter how long I feed it. They'll literally just sit there and it looks like they're going to starve. But yeah, I don't stress about, making the point to having super expensive food. So will they eat it? Great. Is it allowing them to show good color? Are they healthy? Are they living a long life? Even if they're eating it, well, it doesn't do any good if the fish is supposed to live like 3 years and you constantly are losing fish after 6 months. But I don't find that to be the case. So the foods that we feed, yeah, the Tetra foods, the Hikari foods, our fish are eating it. They're healthy. They're reproducing. They look good. Their colors are great. And to me, those things are super important. So yeah, I could say, yeah, I feed these super expensive foods. And the question you have to ask yourself, are you getting twice the value out of that food if it costs twice as much? Filtration. Filtration is moving water so that those microbes can accomplish the nitrification cycle. Yes, there's a mechanical filtration aspect that too, pulling stuff out of the water column. I just found for me personally, I don't need to spend twice as much on a hang on the back filter and still have it do what it's supposed to do, still have it clean the water mechanically, and still have the microbes grow on a surface and have no issues. And so I use those things. They're not as expensive. And again, some of that is preference, right? So we talk about the more expensive foods, the more expensive filtration, and we think, okay, we've got to have those things. Somehow it's better. And that's sometimes the case, but not always the case. And it's the same thing with, I've got 3 hang on the back filters on a 40-gallon breeder. And I've got 3 Aqua Clear 70s on a 40-gallon breeder. And look how awesome my tank looks. That's great, except I would be willing to bet on an average stocked 40-gallon breeder, even one Aqua Clear 70 is probably twice what you need in terms of surface area for the nitrification process. I'm not talking about mechanical filtration. One of the things I think we do a lot of times is we over filter fish tanks. The 125 Oscar tank, there's 3 sponge filters and Marineland hang on the back. I don't do that because I'm worried about the nitrification process. I do it more for mechanical filtration with the hang on the back, but I'd be willing to bet I could remove at least one of those sponge filters and the hang on the back filter and never have an issue with ammonia or nitrite.
I'm sure because you and I are the same age, although you are a little bit older than me.
Oh, come on, man. It's like, what is it, like 6 months?
I think it was 7 months or so. Who cares? But
well, that's a big difference.
But look at the shape you're in. Look at the shape I'm in. Who looks older? Definitely not you. But I look older. That was meant to be like, I'm saying I look older than you.
No, anyway. Man, see, look at all this gray right here. I got a bunch of it.
Oh, I mean, come on. I don't let mine grow because of that, because I would, anyway, that was really insulting, but mine would be white. That's why I don't let mine grow all the way up. But I've always wanted to have that look that you have, the beard with the bald head. I like that look, but it just doesn't work on my head. Anyway, I'm sure you remember, because I remember when the Penguin 350 came out. I was like, what is that? Like, that was the coolest thing ever. Marineland product. It's been one of my favorite hang on the back filters forever. Then the Emperors came out and it was like, are you kidding me? I mean, I am not somebody that shies away from any brand. I don't think Marineland is a low end brand by any stretch. But you get people. I am a Fluval guy. I love Fluval. If they make a product, that's the one I'll get. But I love those filters too. And I've said it before in videos, and I will say it forever. The most success that Lisa and I ever had breeding African cichlids, we were feeding the entire fish room except for the fry because they were too small. But Hikari Cichlid Excel. That food was phenomenal. And our fish bred like crazy. And, and the Cichlid Excel is a little bit more expensive than the real low end, like $8 bags of Hikari food. But our fish always did phenomenal on Hikari Cichlid Excel. And then every Oscar I've ever had in my life, I have fed the green Hikari bag with the Tiger Oscar on the front. I've fed that with every Oscar I've ever had, and they've always been perfectly fine. So using the high-end brands is not a bad thing. Of course it's not, but it doesn't make you a better fish keeper. Some of the best fish keepers out there, I'm not in this group, are using the cheap stuff, and it works out perfectly fine.
Yeah, and it sure does. I've got people, in some of our fish clubs, and they make my fish room look like a beginner fish room. They've got hundreds and hundreds of tanks, and they can't afford to feed some of the more expensive brands. And so they're using the Tetra Flakes. And, we see people on YouTube using L.R. Bretts uses Tetra, the crisps. He's having great luck with that. My Oscars really like the Hikari food sticks. I throw that in there, and they just go absolutely insane for those things.
Mm-hmm. Yep, it's definitely good stuff. And it's easy to find too. If you're in a pinch and you need to run down, I got a Walmart and a Petco next door to each other, like a mile and a half from my house. It's 9 o'clock at night. Oh my God, I don't have any fish food. You got to go out and get it. You can find it just about anywhere. So I like that. I don't know if Hikari's at Walmart. Is it? I think they have like Wardley or something. But anyway, do you want to get into the parasite thing? Do you want to talk about that? Or do you just want to maybe end the rule conversation with hybrids? Or how do you want to go? I'm going to let you steer the show here tonight.
Well, we talked a little bit about parasites, and the one point I want to make is you can have an education, a formal education in some of these things. But one of the things that, when we had talked about, started talking about at the Aquatic Experience and beyond is I actually, when people ask me questions about parasites, even though I did an aquaculture and fish health master's cert, I actually personally don't have a ton of experience dealing with parasites because the only thing I've ever had to deal with in my fish room is ick. And that's something that most people have to deal with. And that's for the most part because I tend to get my fish from people in clubs and people that I know. And so they're breeding them at their house and they're not going through, some of the wholesalers and all the shipping and all the stress. And, it's just interesting where, it's one of those things where you can talk about having a formal education of something, but it's also really, really, really important when you have real life hands-on experience with some of these diseases as well.
Yeah. I mean, I've one of the best fish I ever had came from a fish club meeting thing. And that was a huge Venustus and I loved him. And his name was Vinny. And I was so sad when he ended up dying, but yeah, we don't really have any active fish groups around here. There is the, I don't know, it's one, I get emails all the time, but their meetings are like 2 hours for me. So I don't go to them, but I live out in the country, so we don't really have it. This is my fish club right here. So I don't really get to go to many auctions or anything like that. Plus I don't have any tanks to put them in. So, all right, let's touch for just a second, because we could go all night about hybrids. Because I know you've got a lot to say about them. And they are, I don't know that owning a hybrid would be something that people would say you're a rule breaker, but breeding hybrids, some people just lose their minds over that. So as far as the rule book says, what's the deal on hybrids?
So for me personally, this is one where I kind of straddle both sides of the fence. There are certain fish where I just want to see what happens. I've got a 75 gallon where I've got some red empress and some dragon bloods, eureka reds. I'm going to put a star sapphire in there pretty soon. I've got some Benjis in there as well, females, and they produce some of the most beautiful dragon bloods and some of the most beautiful OBs that I've ever seen. And people love them. And I sell them as hybrids. And I will even put the mix on the bag when I go to the swaps and say, hey, this is a red empress dragon blood mix. And so that's the way that they're sold. There are certain fish that I would probably not hybridize. So anything on the CARES list, there's no way that I would ever hybridize something like that. I've seen some people in our clubs do some absolutely amazing things, mixing certain peacocks and getting these hybrids that are mind-blowing. I mean, you wouldn't even think a cichlid could look the way these fish look with the iridescence and the blues and the whites and the unbelievable finish. And it's something that it's interesting. And I think the average person, when they look at some of these hybrids, they don't necessarily care, oh my gosh, this is a purebred or a hybrid. They just see something that looks amazing. And if that's going to get them interested in the hobby and they're not trying to themselves breed it. And of course, we can't control what happens once the fish leave our possession. And that's an argument against hybridization. Yeah, you put a hybrid out there. And what if other people do it or they're not educated and they think it's a purebred? And that's why you have to be very careful when you sell these things. But yes, I do play with some hybridization with some of my peacocks just to see the beauty that comes from that. And there are other fish that I would never think to do that. So for instance, I'm not going to mix, like for me, shell dwellers, I'm not going to mix my Similis and my Maltese or my Brevis and my Maltese or different types of Cyprichromis. That's just me personally. Again, that's just something, it's a preference that I have. I don't want to do that. But for some of the peacocks, they can be kind of interesting.
Yeah, some of the prettiest peacocks out there are hybrids. I've got one right there. And I mean, I'm the exact same way. I used to breed OBs and loved it, and they sold like crazy. So from a business standpoint, that made a whole lot of sense. But I agree. I think one of the biggest arguments with hybrids is that you have to be told what they are. Like if they're in a fish store and they're not labeled as a hybrid, that's a bad thing. I kind of agree with that. I mean, these people, when they're buying a fish, they need to know what it is that they're getting. And you said that. I agree. If you're going to sell a hybrid, the person that's buying it should know what it is and that it is a hybrid. But I don't think it's a bad thing, and I don't think it's one of those things that's destroying the hobby or anything like that. I think that's a little bit silly. So,
and And there's a lot of fish that I keep. A lot of the peacocks I do keep separate. So I did breed a lot of Eureka Reds, and I kept that strain pure. I've got some Star Sapphires. I keep that strain pure. I've kept Red Empress pure for a very long time. So it's for me, a matter of, okay, I want to keep certain strains pure just because I like them and the way they look. And then I've got a tank that I kind of play with just to see what's going to happen.
Yeah, hybrids are just fun. I mean, some of the cool, just look at the blood parrots. I mean, come on, you either love them or hate them, but I think they're one of the coolest fish out there. And if you didn't know that those are hybrids, then surprise. But that's one of the coolest fish ever, and it's a hybrid. So I love that. So what do you think about hitting up the chat here and maybe taking some questions? I haven't really seen a lot of questions. I've seen more statements of people giving their opinions, which is a beautiful thing. But do you have time to take some pictures, really? To take some questions from the chat? We didn't really talk about how much. We didn't really talk about how much time I have you here today.
I'll hang for the duration if you guys want me to hang around, for sure. Yeah, I've been kind of keeping an eye on the chat a little bit. I saw some questions earlier on. If we haven't answered your question, I would say go ahead and ask it again. I saw something about a 40-gallon breeder a while back, and I don't remember the context of the question. I saw another one about Multispinosa and trying to keep those. You've got a pair. I don't remember who asked it, but there was a pair of Multispinosa, and trying to keep them from killing each other, when they were moved into a new tank. For the most part, at least in my experience, the Multispinosa is not a super, super aggressive fish. So the fact that you've got two and they're chasing each other around, maybe you've got a couple of males, the more rock work, the more plants that you have, the better off you're going to be. If you've got other fish in that tank, maybe some dither fish to kind of take their mind off of things and explore other areas, that may help. The rock work, if you've got caves, just to kind of keep the other fish out of the sight, the line of sight of the more aggressive fish, that can help as well. I don't know if you've got any things you want to share.
I'm going to be totally honest. Was occupied while you were answering that, and I don't even know what you were just talking about. I'm a horrible host. Anyway, I'm sorry. I don't have anything to add because I wasn't listening, because I'm a terrible host.
Don't worry. We got you covered.
I do see something in here though that I'm glad I see. Terry Lindsay was commenting to Friday Fish Facts. He said, Ron, you've done some great work on your channel lately. I'd love to see more of your live streams with people that are part of the community, of this community, people like Rachel and Joey. Well, what about me? How about me? I'm actually going to go on Friday Fish Facts channel. Is it December 12th, Ron? I think it is. Going to be going on his live stream with him. So I'm definitely excited. I'm not Rachel. I'm not Joey. I know that's disappointing, but I'm excited to go on that with him. And then somebody said something about this tank being hazy. It looks like I must have just done a water change today. First of all, I don't do water changes in that tank. Lisa does. That's hers. She won't let me do them. And secondly, no, it's been that way ever since we set it up. We haven't had it crystal clear yet. We've been fighting it. It looks so much better than it used to. We had it look like that once. And then Lisa went and messed with it, and it got all cloudy again. So we haven't been able to get that tank completely cleared up yet. But yeah, it's on its way. We're working on it, and there you go. A lot of people talking about 100 subscribers, and everybody's making jokes. I'm only 85 subscribers away from 80, whatever. That's all fun and games.
Hey,
good stuff.
I found a really good question here, Jamie McDonald. Can you talk about the pros and cons of large water changes? I think that's an awesome question. And at least for me, in an ideal world, I would change water in the smallest possible volume I could. Now, I can't do that because I don't have an auto water change system. But if I did, to me, that's ideal. And the less water you can change at one time, in my personal opinion, the less impact that's going to have on the fish. I know a lot of people, especially cichlid keepers, are like, I do a 75% water change every week. And most of the fish, they're fine. They do just fine with that kind of a water change. But at least for me personally, I would rather do smaller water changes more often if possible, just to reduce the impact of changing water parameters on the inhabitants. I tend to think that water changes can stress fish out. And there are certain fish, at least in our fish room, where we do smaller water changes. A lot of the Lake Tanganyika fish, we've got the 50-gallon lowboy. We've got Cyprichromis in another tank. We've got a 40-gallon and a 33 long with Tanganyikans in it. And those tanks, I try to do smaller water changes because they really don't respond well to, hey, here's a 70% water change. Oscar tank, I can change out 60-65% of that water and they don't miss a beat. The Mbunas really don't seem to care. But for me personally, I would rather do smaller more often if possible.
Yeah, perfect world for me. I mean, if I was setting up like my fantasy fish room, I would have an auto system, and it would just be like a drip system that would be constant all day long, every day, drip, 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 and never do any water changes. That's how I would do it. I went up and spent some time with Discus Hans, who I'm sure you're familiar with. He's about an hour and a half, hour and 45 minutes from us. And his system, I actually put it on video. It's a really good system that he has. And I don't know if he said in that video or if he's ever told me like what the percentages is, but he's got big racks, and the entire rack is on one giant sump underneath. And the sump probably has 600 gallons in it because it's, 30 feet long and 4 feet wide. It's just a giant pool underneath his tanks. And he drains the entire sump out and then refills it, and that's his water change. And his system is beautiful. It's just pulling levers and it just automatically does it. It's beautiful. But so his isn't a constant water change, but that's what I would do if I was going to set it up. But I'm not talking about like 100% a day. I'm talking about, in cichlid tanks, I'd probably do like 25% per day is what I would probably do in that. But I don't know. I mean, once I get to my dream setup, maybe I'll know exactly what I'm going to do with it. But yeah, I like the smaller water changes more frequently. I mean, that just makes total sense. I don't have that luxury to be able to do that. I do about 60% a week in that tank. There's only 6 fish in there, and Lisa she's crazy with water changes in that. So, yeah, there you go.
Here's another good question here. Paul Martin, do you test your water before doing a water change to verify the actual need to make that water change? Absolutely. And so one of the things that we've done in our fish room, once our stocking levels have stabilized, once we know the types of plants that we've got in there, we test nitrates. And for us, ideally, we don't want our nitrates to go much over that 20 parts to 25 parts per million. And so for us, the idea is do a water change that will allow us to not get any higher than that before we do the next water change. So there's no sense in doing a 50% water change on a tank when the tank's only at 15 parts per million, or it's basically at 10 parts per million nitrates. You're wasting water, you're stressing out fish, you're wasting time, and that's not necessary. So some of our tanks that are heavily planted, we might not even do a water change every week, or maybe they're only getting 10%, while there's other tanks like the Oscar tank that doesn't have any plants. We've got some pothos growing on top, but because of the heavy stocking levels, the large fish, the large amount of feeding, those tanks need more. So absolutely testing water and gauging where your nitrates are right after you do a water change, and then testing them again right before you do a water change and seeing how that is elevated throughout the course of that time can absolutely hone in your water change schedule. And it's certainly a good thing to do.
A good thing to do, but it's not what I do. All the more reason why you should take your advice from him and not me. But no, I mean, for me, I've always just done it based on routine. It's like I've figured out, because of the amount of fish that are in there, how much I should be doing just through watching the tank and paying attention to things. And then once I figure that out, okay, I'm going to want to do about 50% per week. Then it's just my routine. That's just how I do it. And I mean, I haven't really had any huge problems. The only problems I've had in there is fish killing each other, but I haven't necessarily had a problem in there because of me not doing my job. But again, Lisa, with this one, I don't even know what she's doing. She does it when I'm at work, and I don't even know. So, see, I should be reading these questions while you're talking. That way I know the questions before I actually read them on the live stream, but I don't do that because then I end up getting caught like I did a minute ago where you asked me to comment on something and I didn't even know what you were talking about. So I haven't read on.
Don't you worry.
Somebody asked about my tattoo. It's my daughter's name, Skylar, Schuyler in script. That's what that is. Enter date of birth, 3/5/99, but it's upside down, so it looks like 6/6 whatever.
All right. So what do you do? We've got Severin Aquatics, pros and cons of overstocking African cichlids to manage aggression.
Talk about rules. That's a good question, especially with today's topic, because wow, I'm sitting here taking over on that. I'm sorry, you're my guest. I should have let you talk about it, but that is a good question. I'm going to let you answer it first, and then I'll give my opinion. But
so,
I mean, the rule for a long time was you have to overstock your tanks to keep aggression down. So what do you think?
So I can tell you that is something that I do follow. Again, it's just worked. And so I have a 75-gallon Mbuna tank, and those fish sometimes get a bad rap. And I think in that 75-gallon at this point, we've probably got somewhere in the neighborhood of 25 to 30 Mbuna in there that are getting pretty close to full grown. And it's worked out wonderfully. I've got no fin nipping going on in that tank. I don't have anybody hiding in a corner. I've never had any issues with that tank. And so I would consider that to be an overstocked tank. When it comes to the peacocks, if it's an all-male peacock tank, I personally tend to have better luck when there are more fish in that tank as opposed to less. I also have better luck when, especially with the peacocks, if they don't look really super similar. That can sometimes help. So maybe if you've just got 2 red empress males in there with a bunch of other peacocks, for me personally, the red empress will sometimes spar a little bit while they're even leaving the other fish alone. So I do tend to overstock a little bit on those African cichlid tanks.
Yeah, I do too. I mean, this is not heavily stocked right now. It needs to be more stocked. And that's why I'm having a problem in there. We've got 2 fish in that tank right now that are battling for position, and it changes by day. One of them will be the tank boss one day, and the next it'll be the other one. And it's frustrating. I mean, I've lost probably like 7 or 8 fish total in the last, I don't know if it's that many, probably, I don't know, but I've lost quite a few fish in there from aggression, not from, anything wrong in the tank. And I am of the belief that if I had 14 in there, it would be less. I would have to be doing a lot more work, but if I had, 12, 14 of them in there, the aggression would be dispersed and it would be fine. And that's kind of how I've always done it. I mean, I've always overstocked tanks because I, in my experience, have found it to be the easiest way to keep the peace. Now, having said that, we also at the store, we would have, we would buy 24 red empresses, and then through the course of a few weeks, 20 of them get bought and there's only 4 left. And those 4 live in there perfectly fine. They're not hurting each other. I mean, haps typically do better in smaller groups than peacocks do anyway, but that would be the same thing with peacocks. I mean, there would be times, look at them fighting right there while we're talking. There would be times where we would have 3 or 4 peacocks in a tank and they'd be fine, so in the store, it's not like I'm going to say, oh, there's only 3 left. Let me take those out and put them over in this tank so that there can be more in there. I never did that. I kept them all separated and it worked fine. So I've been on both sides of it. And I think that overstocking is the way to go, but that's just my opinion and my experience. I did a whole live stream about this. I don't know. It was a couple of weeks before the aquatic experience. I talked all about that and gave my opinions on it. And I also expressed that there are other YouTubers that keep African cichlids that have the exact opposite opinion as me. And that's fine. It doesn't mean they're wrong and I'm right or the other way around. It just means that's what works for them. And I go with what works for me. Somebody asked about the fish swimming around happy in there. Are they ottos? No, they're cories. There's 4 albino cories and 4 of the little salt and pepper ones. I don't even know what they're called. I'm not a cory expert. Okay. Don't overstock tank, will only cause more issues. Separate aggressive fish in a quarantine tank. Yeah, I mean, see, there's the other side of the argument. I mean, I don't believe it causes more issues. Does it cause more work? Yeah. But does it cause more issues? Not necessarily. I think it helps those issues. But you can have somebody overstock their tank and it goes completely upside down on them, and there you go. So
here's another good question here. River Life. Mbuna's in a 40 breeder. So I've got Mbuna's in a 40 breeder right now. We've got some Pseudotropheus solosi, and again, this is one of these things where it's probably the exact opposite of what most people would say would work. I have 4 males and 2 females in a 40-gallon breeder, breeding like crazy. No aggression, no fin nipping, nothing is wrong. They grew up together, and that's all I've got in that tank are just those 6 fish. I had at one point a group of red zebra Mbunas growing up in a 23-gallon bow front. I had probably 14 or 15 that were getting to the point where they were about 2.5, maybe 3 inches before they went to swaps and auctions. Never had an issue. Now, had they gotten older and started breeding, maybe we would have had issues there. But the Solosi, I've had in a 40-gallon breeder now for a couple of years and have not had a single issue. Could you try the same thing and have a horrible experience? Quite possibly. But I found if you keep, a breeding group in a 40-gallon breeder, I've done it many times and not had any issues, but I've also known a lot of people who've tried that and they wind up with the dominant male and a couple females, and that's it.
Yeah, we used to breed peacocks and peacocks and Mbunas in 29-gallon tanks. They would have 8 fish in it, and we would usually, with the Mbunas, it's more difficult because it's harder to sex them, but, the peacocks, we would have 1 male and 5 or 6 females, and Mbunas, we would try to do the same thing. But with Mbunas, it would be just buy them unsexed, and they are what they are. But they would be in a 29-gallon tank, and they bred like crazy. I want to get to Barbara Jackson's question because she's asked it twice now. And we kind of did address it, or at least I did. What do you think about automatic water change system? That's my dream. It's not that I dislike doing water changes. I mean, it's part of the hobby and it's not a big deal. But in a perfect world, I would have a water changing system, and it would be one that I don't even have to turn levers. I would just somehow have it to where the water is dechlorinated and put into the tanks by itself, and I don't have to do anything with it. And it's not a laziness thing. It's more just doing what's best for the fish. That's what I would do. But what about you? I mean, did you even, I don't know. What's your opinion on that?
So when we built the fish room, at the time that we added a lot of the tanks, we had 8 or 9 down there. And I did consider doing an auto water change system. The problem was, in order to do that, you need a lot more plumbing and you need a way to store water, or at least get it dechlorinated before it goes into tanks. And I really wasn't willing to build that infrastructure. There's a part of me that actually doesn't mind. I wouldn't say I necessarily enjoy doing the water changes, but I don't mind it because when you're in that tank and, the tanks where you're doing gravel vacuuming and you're moving stuff around, you tend to discover a lot of things like, holy cow, there's some babies in this tank, or wow, this plant's really taking off in this area, or you really start to pay attention to what the fish are doing. So I actually don't mind doing the manual water changes because we've got it set up in such a way where it goes pretty smoothly. But if I could go back and snap my fingers, would I put an auto water change system in? You absolutely.
Yeah, Hans's system, like I was talking about before, he uses regular tap water from Baltimore. In Baltimore, anyway, the way his system is set up, the water comes in from the street and he stores it in those big, I think they're like 275-gallon tanks with the metal cage around them. Like they use them a lot in like the food service industry and stuff. He's got like 4 of those. The water comes in and he fills those 4 tanks up, and then he goes through and puts this powdered dechlorinator in there, and it just circulates for 24 hours. And then the next day, and his whole place is heated to 96 degrees. It's brutal. And so the water the next day is all up to temperature. It's all dechlorinated, and he flicks a bunch of levers and it changes the water, and it's a beautiful thing. There's 2 more in here that I want to address. One of them could be lengthy, so I'll save that for the second one. But this next one, you are the one that has a master's in this. So I'm going to have you answer this question and I'm not even going to comment on it. I'm just going to go straight into the next question. I fling a pile of poo is the guy or girl's name. That's an interesting YouTube name. And the question's about poo too. Does stringy poo mean sickness of some sort?
Sometimes. I guess that's the short answer. Sometimes, yes, it can have something to do with an internal parasite. Just stringy poo could also be a stressed out fish. It can have something to do with what you're feeding the fish. But if it were me and I had white stringy poo coming out of the fish, I would start looking at internal parasites. But again, this is the difference between someone who's, yeah, I've got the degree, and you would think, oh, wow, he knows everything. But it's not something I typically deal with because I've never had to. And so that's one of those things where you're going to want to rely on people who are like, oh yeah, I've had 50 fish with white stringy poop, and this was what it was the first time. And the second time, this is exactly how I treated it. And from personal experience, I know this is going to work for you. So probably some type of internal parasite, but it may not be. And you'd probably want to do some research on white stringy poop. And I'm really not going to be a lot of help because it's not something I've dealt with a lot in my fish room.
Yeah, I mean, I said I'm not going to comment on it, but anybody that asks me that, I say, you know what, start looking into internal parasites, and if you feel like they have them, treat them. It's not a big deal. The medications are not overly expensive. So now the next question is one that I said could be a while. I don't know. I mean, it's one, I don't know your opinion on this. I'm trying to find this. Oh, and I think this person's getting lucky because I think this is the second question that we've had from this person. What is both of your opinions on bringing wild caught fish into the hobby? That's Severn Run Aquatics asked that, and I'll take that first, and then I'll hand it over to you. Me personally, I don't do it. I don't think people who keep wild caught fish are bad people. I don't think that wild caught fish are bad for the hobby. I'm just really weird about that kind of thing. A wild animal that has free reign, especially with these fish that have these giant lakes or rivers or oceans, and they have the world. They can just travel anywhere they want to go, and it's wide open. And then to take them from that and put them into a little glass box, I personally don't like that. Yes, I know there is the argument that, oh, they're no longer going to be under threat from predators and they're going to get better food and their water's going to be better. I get it. I understand that. But just for me, I've never been a big fan of keeping wild caught fish. Again, I don't think it's bad, but it's just not my thing. That's the easiest way to say it. Just like hunting is not my thing. I can't kill animals. I would never go hunting. Jason, you might be an avid hunter. I don't know. If you were, that wouldn't change the way I feel about you. I'm not one of those people that if you do something different than me, I don't like you. I'm not like that. It doesn't work for me, but if it works for you, that's completely fine. I don't think it's bad, but it's bad for me. So your turn.
Yeah. So when it comes to the wild caught fish, I look at it a couple of different ways. For me personally, that's where we get into problems potentially with introducing parasites and bacterial infections and internal stuff and external parasites. So for me personally, I kind of shy away from it just because I don't want to take the risk from that perspective. But there is a different perspective, and that is if you're breeding fish and your genetics are constantly within the same population, sometimes it can be a benefit to bring in the same species after they've gone through a lot of quarantine and bring them in to try and go ahead and expand the genetic pool of that population. So from that perspective, it makes sense to me. But for me personally, I don't generally risk it because I don't want the problems of potentially introducing parasites. The other thing I would say is I can't see myself bringing in wild fish if they are readily bred in captivity. For me, I would just as soon take the fish that have been bred in captivity and leave nature on its own. The other issue that we have to consider is there are people that live in countries and that's how they make their money. And so in some cases that can be a detriment to the environment if they're taking a lot of fish out of that environment. But there's also been studies that have shown if you take that income away from them, the environment can actually be much worse if they're no longer able to sell the fish. They tend to exploit the environment in other ways. So it's actually a really complicated situation. But for me personally, I tend to stay away from the wild caught fish just because of the disease aspect.
Yeah, and I mean, like I said, I don't think it's a bad thing, and I definitely, if I was ever going to make an argument for it, it would be what you just said. The fact that there are people that make their living collecting fish and they don't make much of a living and that's all they have. And so, yeah, there is definitely a good argument there. But me personally, it's not my thing. I know guys like Joseph Harden go out and they go on these collecting trips, and Corey does and all that. That's awesome. I mean, it's awesome to watch the videos of those guys doing that. And I'm super happy for them. That's their thing. It's just not my thing. I mean, and I think we're allowed to have differing opinions from people and still be friends. I think that's okay to do that. How do you guys feel about scrubbing algae off of backgrounds and rocks and etc.? That's from B. Anderson. Me personally, I'm not a fan of algae in my tanks, so I do it. But other people like the natural look of algae. So, Jason, what about you?
You're gonna really love this then. I I have a 33 long. It's got some Geophagus brasiliensis in it right now, and it's kind of cool. It's got a black background, black sand. The rocks I've got are dark gray. I noticed that there was some blackbeard algae starting to grow on those rocks, and I thought it looked kind of cool. So I've actually been encouraging it to grow, and it's getting longer, and so it's starting to like sway back and forth a little bit. And I know it's weird, and maybe I'm the only one on the face of the earth that's like, you know what? I'm going to see just how much that's going to grow. And I've left it that way. In terms of regular algae, like the green hair algae or just a general algae that grows on stuff, I don't take huge efforts in trying to make it go away. I do have bristlenose plecos in a lot of my tanks, or snails, and they tend to take care of that for the most part. I don't like algae on the front part of the tank, so I will usually scrape that off if it happens, but that's pretty rare. But I don't mind algae. I don't mind it on the rocks. I don't mind it on the sides of the tanks or the back. Yeah, it probably doesn't look the best, but it doesn't bother me. And I can't wait. I hope that. So here's the problem. The blackbeard algae that I'm trying to grow, most people are like, oh my gosh, the blackbeard algae, it took over my tank, killed my plants, and I can't see my fish. I've been trying to grow this stuff for like 6 months, and it won't grow any more than a half an inch. So I think I'm going to start dosing it with Easy Green.
Nice. just let it flourish in there. You know, I went to an old timers fish room. Man, this must have been like 2012. This guy was selling bristlenose plecos, like little babies. He was a breeder in his basement. Show up to the guy's house. The guy was like 80. I mean, he was old. And it's a little townhouse in Maryland. And he took me down into the basement, and he had this little fish room. Every single tank was disgusting. I mean, the water was clear, but the only glass that was clear was the front. Like, he cleaned the front off, the face of the tank. Everywhere else, there was just so much algae. And my first thought was, they call these algae eaters. But anyway, that's all he bred was plecos. It was just funky. The whole place, like, he just didn't care. And it was one of the coolest fish rooms I've ever been into, because it was an old guy and I got to see the way he did things. And I bought like 100 little bristlenose off of him for like $40. So it was a beautiful thing. But some people, it doesn't bother them because they look at it as a natural thing. Me, I like a lot of my tanks to look like that. I'm a little bit more forgiving when it comes to algae in a planted tank, because it is kind of that natural look. But something like that, algae would just look terrible in there. So I get it out of there. I got a fish in there that gets it out of there for me, at least off of the rocks. But somebody asked and I'm going to ask you this too, because I don't know the answer to this. Steve's Aquatics said, John, then I guess you don't like saltwater fish tanks. And I'm thinking that he said that because of me not liking the wild caught fish thing. And that's true. I mean, most saltwater fish are bred, or not bred, but are collected. And that is very true. That is not the reason why I don't have saltwater tanks, though. I do like saltwater tanks, but I just don't have any right now. And I don't know, shame on me, I don't know if you have any. I don't think you do, but do you have any saltwater tanks?
I do not. And that's part of the reason why I don't. I mean, the major reason is I don't want to deal with all the upkeep. I tell people for the time it would take me to take care of one saltwater tank, I could probably do 20 freshwater tanks and have all these different types of fish. So I don't want to get involved with it because of the cost, because of the time. And yeah, there is an aspect of it, where you are taking a lot of the fish from the wild. They're getting better with getting the fish to breed in a saltwater environment, but there's so few relative to the amount of fish that people actually keep. So yeah, I don't do the saltwater tanks. That is certainly a contributing factor.
Yeah, I mean, I had two at one point, a little nano. Well, I guess they're both nanos, but I did enjoy them. But yeah, I don't like mixing up the salt water and all that. I mean, it's not that much work, but that was just kind of a nuisance. But I do I love looking at a really nice reef and stuff like that. It's awesome. But I mean, I got my first saltwater tank like 3 years ago, and I've been keeping fish since I was 19. So, it's not something that I've ever been mega into. I can't keep a coral to save my life, but with the fish, I do okay. And I can't say that I'll never have another one, but right now it's all about the freshwater fish. Okay, we're going to take one more. And before I do that one more, because we are going on an hour and 40 minutes here, and so we'll do one more, which I think is an important one, and then we'll cut it off. But before we get to there, I do want to thank Mike Howe. He's probably not here now. mhowe909. I don't know the exact name of his channel. He hung out with us at the Aquatic Experience. Jason, I'm sure you know him. He gave a $4.99 super chat way back in the very beginning of the stream here, and I didn't shout him out for that, and I feel bad for it. So thank you for that, Mike. I appreciate it. And so the last question, and this is a good one. Steve's Aquatics. I think he's another one that's had a couple of questions tonight. Do you hope, this is for both of us, and I'm going to take it first because I know your answer is better than mine. Do you hope that your children will follow in your love of fish keeping? And my answer to that is yes, but right now it's just hope because none of mine are into it. It's one of those things, they like to come in here and look at the tanks and they go, oh, that's cool. And when they get a new fish, they're like, oh, that's neat. And then they go back and do their thing. They don't really care about it. They like them and they think it's cool that me and their mother are into them, but they're not like, can I help you do water changes this weekend? They're not into it like that, and they never really have been. And I would love for them to be into it. We try to lead by example. We bring them in here. We're like, come on, look, isn't this so cool? Look, we got these Discus, and they're just like, yay. And then they walk out the door. So, but I know your situation is different than mine. So why don't you go ahead and take this one on and let's hear what you have to say.
So it's funny that you saw that question because that was one I was looking at as well. I have two boys, Luke, who's 14, Eli, who's 11. And yes, they are a big part of our fish room, as is my wife, Joanna. The four of us, we do a lot together with the fish room. And, for Luke and Eli, they do so much. In fact, there are times when, I can't get home. I've got a class that runs later, some students who have questions, and we do water changes on Tuesday, Thursdays, and Saturdays for the most part. And we kind of break up the fish room into, like thirds, and then we clean a third, a third every Tuesday, a third every Thursday, a third every Saturday. And there are times when I can't be home in time and I come home, Luke and Eli are already down there. They're taking care of business. They've got the sponge filters ripped out. They're cleaning those. They've got the tanks, emptied the way they're supposed to. And if I don't get home in time, the stuff just gets done. And I'm really proud of them for that because, for kids their age, and Luke's been doing that. And he's really taken control over that ever since he was like 10 or 11, where I knew I could just trust him, go downstairs. If I say, hey, I need the Tuesday part done, it just gets done. And we have a lot of fun with it. Luke's probably into it more than Eli. Eli kind of likes his lizards and things a little bit more, but we go to the fish clubs together and he's the first one like, oh, Dad, we've got the GCCA this Sunday, and he'll sit there and watch the presentations for an hour and a half. And it's a lot of fun. And for me personally, it just makes it that much better when they're part of it. And it's cool.
I'm so jealous of that. And like I said, ours are into it, but when it comes to the work, they're not interested in doing all of that. I would love for them to be. I do have an interesting little story about it though. Our second oldest, girl is not interested in fish at all, but she was like at that age when I started to kind of build a following on YouTube, where she would kind of make fun of me a little bit, like, you're making fish videos, you're a nerd, and it was cute. And she came to the store one day when we still had our shop, and it was late in the evening, and this family comes in, and it's, husband, wife, and a few kids, and they're younger than yours. I don't know how old they are. And the kid, one of the younger kids, ran up to me like I was Tom Brady or something, like so excited to meet me there in the shop. And they explained that they lived in like Maine. I mean, the guy might be watching right now. I don't know. They lived in Maine or something, and they were traveling down to South Carolina on vacation, and they swung through the shop to meet me. That's what Lisa wasn't doing anything with the channel at that point. So it was just me. And so that girl, Jordan is her name. She's 20 now. She'll be 21 in a couple of months. She was sitting there like, after this kid freaked out about me, like meeting me, whatever, but they left, and she was like, wow, you're like famous. And she got a kick out of that. And the reason why I bring that up is she's the only one we have 5. She's the only one that randomly will come up to me. Like, she'll come over to the house. She doesn't live with us anymore. She's got her own place. She'll stop by, and she's like, yeah, I watched your video the other day, the one on that light. It was pretty good. I'm like, what? And it's really cool that she's not really into the fish, but she watches my videos. In fact, she's even watched other fish people's videos, and they talked about me in the video, and she'll send me a link. Hey, this person was talking about you in the videos. It's really cool. So it's almost like now she's into the YouTube side of it, but not necessarily the fish. So that's as close as I get to one of the kids being into the hobby. I wish they were into it like your kids are, though.
Yeah, certainly it does. It makes it so much more fun. And so does this, the community. I think about this constantly. If it was just me alone in a basement with my 60 tanks, it would be cool. Don't get me wrong, but it is light years better when you've got, family. And that includes people who watch the videos and all the comments and meeting people at Aquatic Experience or meeting people at Aquashella and, other YouTubers. And I got to meet you and Lisa and everybody else. That's really, I would say that's every bit as fun as actually just keeping the fish.
It definitely is. I mean, I've been a different person. See, Lisa was out of the hobby for a little bit longer than I was, and it was the Aquatic Experience. It was you and your wife and the other women that were there, and everybody that was there that weekend, that really got Lisa excited again. And the whole way home, 5.5 hour drive, she's just nonstop talking about it, and it's been completely different ever since. And so even if the kids can't be involved, having your significant other involved is huge. I mean, just to be able to talk about, what kind of fish you want to get, or the fish room or whatever, it's awesome. And I love that. And it would be a different world if the kids were involved. They've teased us a couple of times about wanting to get involved, but I don't know that we could get them to come to the Aquatic Experience with us and sit on that red couch all day like your boys did. I don't know that they would do that, but we'll have to see. But yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I would definitely, anyone who has kids that are involved, I admire that. I think it's awesome, because we live in a day where kids do their thing, adults do their thing, and it doesn't involve each other. And unless it's something like sports, you don't really have a whole lot to do with the kids, because they want to go and do their thing and all of that. So having something like that, I think, is awesome. And Lisa said before, we ought to do a video on how to get kids interested in fish keeping. And I'm like, well, how can we do a video on that? We haven't been successful at that. So it's disappointing, but maybe they'll come around. I mean, I didn't start keeping fish till I was 19. So there's still hope for a couple of these kids in this house.
That's right. You never know what seeds you're planting, and they might just one day have kids of their own and be like, oh, this was really fun when we were a kid. And you'll look back and be like, I didn't even think you were interested. And like, oh no, it was great. Now their kids have tanks, and you just never know.
Well, and I didn't ask you the question, and I'm not going to ask you now because we're going to have to wind it down. But a lot of times when you see these streams where there's two YouTubers together, the question always gets asked, how did you get involved in fish keeping? And almost every single story is, my dad had fish tanks, or my mom, or my uncle, or there was always somebody in the family, and the kids weren't into it, but they saw that, they grew up around it, and then when they became an adult, that's what that's when they got involved in it. It wasn't that way for me. Neither one of my parents were pet people. We had a dog, and that was it. So I didn't grow up around it. It just hit me when I was 19. But so many of those stories are that way of, there was always tanks around the house when I was growing up. And so when I became an adult, it was just natural for me to do that. And so that's kind of what I'm hoping for, is these kids grow up and they're old, and me and Lisa are sitting on the rocking chair on the front porch, and they come over and they say, "Hey, guess what? We just got our first fish tank today." That would be cool. That's all the hope I have at this point.
That's awesome. I blame my parents for this, because we literally had a zoo when we were kids. We had, at one point, I remember I had 8 frogs in the house. My parents let me keep all these frogs that I caught at a creek in the house. We'd go to the creek and come home with like buckets full of snakes and turtles and frogs, and we'd bring them in the house, and I never thought anything of it. One time I put a bunch of you're like this. Here's a rule that I broke. I chucked a bunch of bluegill in an Mbuna tank.
Oh my.
That doesn't work. At least it didn't work for me. I'm thinking huge bluegill, little cichlids. Yeah, it'll be fine. I was like maybe 12 years old. The Mbuna were left, and all the poor bluegill, they took a really bad beating. I had to bring those back.
Yeah, bluegill's not a bad looking fish. I mean, I've heard a lot of people talking about keeping them in tanks. Yeah, I mean, for me, I had pets too. I had my own. I had gerbils and hamsters and guinea pigs and turtles and stuff. But my parents didn't. I mean, and none of my siblings did either. I'm the youngest of 4. None of my siblings had any pets but me. But no fish tanks until I was 19 and out of the house. I was already gone, and that's when I got my first fish tank. So we had a dog, and we had an outdoor cat because my dad was allergic to everything. So we couldn't have any animals that shed whatsoever in our house. So there you go. But they did a lot of good things for me growing up, but pets was not one of them. But anyway, I guess it's an hour and 47 minutes. Good Lord. I guess it's time to start winding things down here. This has been a lot of fun, and I'm proud of myself for not doing all the talking, because I always get mad at myself when I have Lisa on here with me and I do all the talking and she just sits here. So I'm glad to be able to share the microphone with you. It's been a lot of fun, and you're a wealth of knowledge, and you're a good guy, and you're a fellow bald man, and that got really weird, but but I definitely appreciate you coming on and doing this, and I don't see any reason why we shouldn't do it again in the future. And are you guys going to do New Jersey again next year?
Oh yeah. This has been a great time. I had a lot of fun. We plan to do, I'm hoping we can do Aquashella in Dallas this spring. We've got Aquashella in Chicago in August, I believe. That's only 30 minutes away from our house, so we'll definitely be there. And then the plan is to also do the aquatic experience this fall. So we're trying to hit all 3 of them, but definitely aquatic experience in the fall, definitely the Aquashella here in Chicago, and we'll try to hit Dallas too. So yeah, it'd be great to get the group back together again. That was a lot of fun.
I know we did the all day stream, the Flip Aquatics stream, and that was really cool, but it shocks me how none of us got together and did like a impromptu live stream, or it's surprising. I mean, there is so much going on, and like for me, there was maybe 1 or 2 people that I had met before. So it was really exciting meeting new people, including you. It's chaotic, but next year we all know each other now. So next year we show up, we should do some like serious planning to do stuff like this, but sitting next to each other rather than, across the country from each other. I don't know. We should do that. All of us, not just me and you, but all of us at the Aquatic Experience.
Yeah, I think now that we've done that on Rob's channel on Flip Aquatics, and we can set up different areas, different live streams, we can certainly make that work. That'd be really cool.
Yeah, and as far as us goes, I don't know. We're definitely going to do Aquatic Experience. I don't even like the word Dallas, if I'm being honest, because I'm a Redskins fan. But Chicago, I don't know. I mean, let's be real. It's up to her. So we'll see. But I don't know. I don't know which one of those are going to be in the plans for us. But I mean, I went to Chicago in 2015. And why weren't you there, by the way?
In 2015, was I there?
I mean, I didn't see
No, I
you.
don't think so. I want to say we started hitting the aquatic experience maybe in 2016.
Okay.
Or maybe it was 2015. Now
I mean,
can't
I didn't
remember.
see you there. And you know, us bald people, we see each other. And I didn't see you there in 15. I was there in 2015. It was me, Joey, Sean Peck, Rachel, and Dustin. I don't think there was any other YouTubers there. Yeah, anyway. So, but definitely aquatic experience, and we got to make some good plans for that. That was so much fun, and it is chaotic, but you know, we got the time before the show every day and the time after. We got to do some videos. Maybe, you know, YouTube stories is coming out. Maybe we can do a bunch of little stories on our YouTube channel, and that'll be fun. But
That would be cool.
Anyway, so this has been fun. I've been trying to wind it down now for 20 minutes, and then I end up talking more. So I've had so much fun with this. My first guest since coming back from my break. I'm glad that was you. And I see, here I go again, getting off topic, but I see my next guest is in the chat right now, and he knows who he is because we've been talking. He knows, so he'll be coming up next. Not sure when, but he's got a full plate right now with a new baby. Let's give you a little hint of who that guy is. So anyway, hey, send me a message. Let's figure out a date on that one. But Jason, this has been a blast. I've had so much fun. I've learned from you today, and that is awesome. So what I used to do before I took my break, when I was doing guests every week, is I basically hand the show over to you. I'm going to mute myself, and I'm not going to say anything else. I'm going to let you say whatever you want to say and close things out. But when you do close it out, don't go anywhere, because I want to thank you and stuff not live on YouTube. So go ahead. I'm going to mute myself, and it is all yours.
Well, everybody, thank you so much for being here. It was a great time. Awesome comments, a lot of really good questions. I was really happy to be here. Happy to see some people and interact with you that I haven't been able to interact with before. Would love to see you in the future. Hopefully we'll get to do this again sometime. It was a lot of fun. Thanks for being here, and we will see you soon.